Alright, so welcome back to another video on Node.js. Specifically on GraphQL. So what is GraphQL? Which is a new way of building frontend and backend, a query language. And the beauty of this is that allows to see how different pieces of data relate each other in our server. So I look at how can you do that using, or especially on GraphQL, it all starts by describing your data using schemas, and if you want to ask for the data, you rely on query. Now, queries or GraphQL queries is much like selecting property on an object. That the beauty of this is because the query really match closely what the return object you will get, you can predict what our query will return, regardless how the data is stored and including the property. And you get that data as a JSON. So I saw who made that possible, Facebook in 2012. Also the specifications, the front-end tools that allow us to create or to build the GraphQL client, such as relay.dev on React framework, and also uh, how you can is create or use a more high-end product such as Apollo. But before that, dive deep into them. I saw how not only can we implement a GraphQL server from scratch, but before that, understand what are the main problems that GraphQL solves: underfetching and overfetching. Because with RESTful architectures, anytime we make a query, anytime we make a request, query multiple collection of value, we lose time making individual requests in getting individual response, which increase the page load time. And this is aka underfetching. And overfetching is that when you when you send a request to an endpoint and you get a lot of data that is not relevant to the user, you need to filter out in the browser to show them. So to solve these two issues that RESTful architecture may have, that the main impact is on performance, specifically on uh, initial page load time or page load time. So with GraphQL, we only have one single entry point, and that is just enough to ask for the data that you want, and hopefully you get back. And querying multiple collection slash type of data. So this is something interesting and very, very powerful, because I also look at the advantage of using GraphQL, such as speed of the development and provide you schema and type, which you already have a self-documented API. Then I look at how can I create that from scratch, okay? By using GraphQL package, from this npm package to build a GraphQL server on Node and see how that things work underneath the hood by performing an HTTP post request to that endpoint, asking for the data that you want, and then you get that, right? So to see a more realistic scenario or more realistic projects, I designed a e-commerce application where I define these several types that most e-commerce will have, like products, order, categories, and so on and so forth. And the interesting thing is not only to define this GraphQL application, right? Is understand uh, what you can do with this application, especially with GraphQL servers, And understand that because most of the time when the front end needs to query really complex nested data structure, really nested complex data structure, is amazing how easy it is to do that first, and we reduce the overhead and we keep the request at bare minimum. So to make your model or to make your application, the GraphQL server app, much more modular, we follow is couple of things, right? Especially for two main components, for schema, right, and resolver. So for schema, we use tools like GraphQL tools, where allow you is to make your schema GraphQL much more scalable. So they provide you a functions to do that, like makes executable function. If you want to get very technical, make executable function where you're going to pass is the type array, and type array means here the collection or all of the type of your server, of your type system, the capability of a GraphQL server. So using functions like load file sync from the GraphQL, where it allows you to load GraphQL files under a particular project structure, and then that's when you're gonna load that into the main executable function. Okay, so since with this, our API now is organized in type and fields rather than endpoints, it is unnecessary to make additional requests asking for multiple collection of data when you query multiple collection of data. And then I look at the resolvers and how you can first understand what resolvers are, and then how you can modularize your application to make it much more maintainable and scalable. So resolvers, to answer the question, it comes with how query works. You know? So when a GraphQL query receives a valid GraphQL request, it executes that, and to determine the value of a property, they use a function called resolvers, right? So resolvers are great because the benefit is it allows us to make APIs uh, doc, uh, APIs uh, calls, right, or any async operations here. So that's one of the beauty of resolvers. And to modelize your application with resolvers, well, you define is a file called resolvers under that particular feature folder. For example, if you define a product, okay, you inside of that folder product you have your GraphQL or your schema file, your resolver file, and something important here is the data layer. Okay, when the whole idea here is to abstract that logic into its own model so the resolvers can be small and clean as possible. You want to make that as much as possible independent from any database implementations, models, because it can quickly grow in complexity. I also look at how can I create is parameterized queries by providing these arguments to a query, and something important in any backend application. For example, when you want to perform crew operations, create, read, update, and delete, right? So far, I have seen how to reach data, which in any API probably is the most common thing you ever do. But also, it's important to know how to create, update, and delete data. So that's part of or the question is how GraphQL do that? Well, you do that by uh, creating or using something called mutation, right? Where it changes the state of your app, okay? And mutations works pretty closely under the hood on like queries. So I also see at how can I implement a mutation, the entire pipeline of implementing a mutations, all right, or this entire supply chain, if you want to call that, of implement mutations. First define is the mutation in that particular GraphQL files, then look at the resolvers, and right below the query you define is a mutation, which is another root level operation in any GraphQL server. Uh, you also have is subscription, something I'm gonna talk about that later. And with mutations, you inside of that map or object, you set it or it takes the name of the mutation and the resolver function. I also see what is the anatomy of the resolver functions. For example, the first argument is the parent. What you receive is the root value. The second is the arguments from that query, parameterized query or parameterized mutation, or even parameterized subscription. And the third argument, which is the context, is data that can be shared across resolvers. So for example, if you want to pass authentication data, okay, yeah, if you want to pass authentication data to check if a user is logging or not to all of your resolvers, you can do that in the context object. Then you have is a state, which it helps indicate the state of the operation. So cool, because once I define is this mutation, okay, that will be called this function from the access layer. All right. Uh, now, now, uh, inside of our data layer is where we define all of this logic that will take care of that part, right? If you're gonna read a different API or a database or another service, you name it. And once I look at this, and the beauty of this, right, and how GraphQL is a new way of building in API and how do we interact with API, right? That's one of the trade-offs of this. That, well, my friend, since this is not RESTful architecture, most developers will take time to ponder and to understand all of these ideas. So the learning curve may be quite steep. Also, catching here is something difficult. It's an advanced topic because they have their own particular way, unlike RESTful, where we have already proven methods to do that. And this flexibility comes with complexity, right? So you need to trade off or check whether you want to use that and with your particular case, if your developer actually knows about this topic, and so on and so forth, right? So this, right, lead us to the next topic, to now understand what Apollo is. You may wonder why. Well, why do I need to look at this? Remember, Apollo is this high-end product that allow us to build front-end and back-end applications Okay, so Apollo is any standard, is an industry standard of GraphQL implementations that providing is the data graph layer to connect mother apps to the cloud. And you may commit to the more advanced features if you want to build a great or a complex GraphQL projects as a part of a much larger team. So, for example, they have federations, ELI hover, but most of the time you're going to see two particular tools: the Apollo client and the uh, yeah, the Apollo client and the Apollo server. So the Apollo client is a set of front-end libraries that allow us is to make GraphQL query and save data. So instead of making individual HTTP post requests to a GraphQL endpoint. So much like you make, or much like you will in graphical, where you define is GraphQL queries, it also comes with other benefits like safe or caching, safe data, caching, network handling, so, or handling loading and error states, and data synchronization with your server. Cool. All right. So this is the client, and then you have is the server. So the server is again uh, it's a set of API libraries that allows you now is to create is a GraphQL server, much like you will with GraphQL API package, but it comes with other benefits like let you run and deploy your node or your server code in a serverless environment and allow you to implement subscriptions, which where subscriptions is sending or pushing data from the server to subscribe clients, much like push notification. So knowing the theory, okay, I also saw how can I implement that by building is an Apollo server, right? And after I using or after I include is the Apollo, and I follow the way of how you can integrate Apollo with an existing Express application. Then once I navigate to the graphical route to see the graphical, uh, it comes with a surprise because here when I run this, it's already running. Okay, GraphQL. Here, I just click here to automatically redirect me to Studio next time. So I query my server, and it will take some time to now do this. So here I can see is now this studio Apollo Graph sandbox where now it allows you to see is the documentation similar as the graphical, the operations that you can perform, and here you can name your query. For example, name a query. This won't fetch anything because of course you need is to define is a query such as let's say order and give me the order the items by product ID, for example, right? And you see that this is very easy how to query nested object to get the data that you want. You can here get this, you're gonna get is the items for that particular product, or the order for that particular product. Okay, and if you can see, for example, all of the orders like this. Uh, yeah, let's see, for example, in the case of order products, giving all the product by ID, all right, and it shows you all of the products by ID. You can also perform a mutation and give a name of the mutation. Let's say uh, blue jacket. Oh my god, okay, blue jacket, and call that mutations. Right now, where I'm looking is at the query, but you can see also the mutations, like add new product and all the arguments and field that you can get from that. Meaning that you can say, hey, I'm going to add this product, or in this case, you say add new product, but it adds that as a part of a variable you can add. But we don't want to do that. We just want us to add a new product like this. And you're gonna pass this static values or hard coded values for that. Okay. Just the ID, which is the blue jacket, the description, a nice blue jacket, and the price. It says 75.11, right? And we want just to get is the ID from this mutation. Uh, Maybe because we're using is single quote, and they expecting is to provide is with double quotes. Let me see if that is correct. If I interpret that correct, you say because you have to pass is that this is the ID, that's right. The description, that's right, and the price. Okay. And here you're gonna say, hey, you just want to give us the ID and the price, right? So when I perform the mutation here, you look at this, it changed the name of the operation. Here I'm going to perform is the product, and here let me rename this query to say all products, or just uh, product list like this. So you add a new product, and you can say mutation blue jacket. All right, and here when you run this query, run list, you get is the blue jacket. Awesome! This is marvelous, beautiful, beautiful. It also shows you is more relevant information, like the status code, how long it took that request, and the payload weight in bytes. So this tool is something very, very, very amazing to use. I also see how can I perform several mutations by using is the alias, all right? And that'll be all for this model, right? Pretty straightforward. I really like it. I really love it. And it's also important to not only be able to repeat all the things that you have learned, but also to understand the technical side and the analytic side of all the knowledge that you have learned and where you can apply it. Give me a moment here. Mhm. Okay, okay. So, so I can. Yeah. So that'll be all for this video of this huge recap. Okay. And well, take care. Bye bye.